Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everyone to session 5. This session is on agricultural vehicles. I'm Carl Chua and I've Kerry Platter here with me today. We do have a bit of a different setup today due to the COVID restrictions in Queensland. Similar to the previous sessions, feel free to submit questions anytime. We're probably just going to answer them at the end of the presentation. The session is being recorded, and I will send out a copy of the presentation and slides after the session. I'll pass it on to you now, Kerry.
Yeah. Carl Chura, who's one of our engineers in HVR, introduced us. My name's Kerry Plater. I'm the principal engineer with in HVR. So this is, as I said, number 5 in the series of webinars. Basically provide you with some information on how things are managed, in this case agricultural vehicles, movement of those on the road. We might go next slide. So what we're going to talk about today is why do we need road access for agricultural vehicles? What is a Class 1 agricultural vehicle under the Heavy Vehicle National Law? Some agricultural vehicle access history, so how it's been managed in the past, how it's been managed at the moment, and another section on actually movement of agricultural equipment other than by them travelling on the roads by themselves. And then we'll have time for questions. Don't expect it to go, probably expect it around an hour or so there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So well, let's get the show on the road. So historically, agricultural vehicles moved agricultural equipment between paddocks. I need to move my tractor across the road, I need to go to the next paddock. And then as the agricultural industry changed, people started getting bigger holdings, they started consolidating holdings and things like that. So there's then more movement between holdings or between paddocks owned. And then we what came out of that, as the holdings got bigger and they started looking at regional contract harvesting, which is where an operator who had the equipment goes and does basically his neighbour's properties and does harvesting on that. So and that could be with anything, not just harvesting. But we were recently up North Queensland with one of the cane growers up there. He had actually set up that model for his business, so he had some fairly large holdings, and he had then self-contracted out his equipment once he finished his harvesting or other things within about a 50k radius. And then you sort of have the seasonal contract harvesters, which basically follow the grain harvest, and so they travel between Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, so just following the harvest. So it has actually changed the access required for agricultural vehicles, starting from very localised access to basically long distance major road access that's now required with the way the agricultural industry is set up now. So what's happened is the regulation or the management of these vehicles has struggled to keep up. So recently, last year, 2019, or the year before, there was a national agricultural notice brought out to try to capture all these different things. So we'll talk about that a bit, but next slide, Carl. So under the Heavy Vehicle National Law, it's actually got definitions of what an agricultural vehicle is. So An agricultural vehicle means an agricultural implement or an agricultural machine built to perform agricultural tasks. So there's two things there. There's an implement or a machine, and the thing is they are actually built to perform agricultural tasks. And the other thing that's an agricultural vehicle is an agricultural trailer. And it carries a load, but it's used exclusively to perform agricultural tasks. So if it's doing another task other than an agricultural task, it's not an agricultural trailer. And we go a bit more into the definitions later. So an agricultural task means a task carried out in agriculture. So cultivating land, growing and harvesting crops, rearing livestock, are all classed as agricultural tasks. So under the Heavy Vehicle National Law, there's restricted access vehicle classes, which we talked back about in an earlier webinar. So you need to be a restricted access vehicle to come under, to require exemptions for mass or dimension. So a Class 1 agricultural vehicle is a heavy vehicle that is an agricultural vehicle, that is a agricultural implement or an agricultural machine that together with its load does not comply with prescribed mass requirement or dimension requirement applying to it. So in this case, prescribed mass and dimension requirements, 2.5 metres wide, 4.3 metres high, 12.5 metres long for a individual vehicle, or 19 metres long for a combination, and the axle masses that are in the law. So for a tractor, say, with, depending on the tyre sizes, they'd either get 6 or 7 tonne on each axle of that tractor as a regulation or prescribed mass requirement. So once they go over that, they then became a Class 1 restricted access agricultural vehicle. The other thing that is always a Class 1 agricultural vehicle is an agricultural trailer. And it doesn't matter if it does or does not comply with prescribed mass or dimension requirements. So an agricultural trailer is always a Class 1 agricultural vehicle. Okay, we'll go next one. So we looked at the different things. So we've got agricultural implements. So it's a vehicle without its own automated power built to perform agricultural tasks and includes an agricultural trailer. So agricultural trailers include this implement. Agricultural implements are built to perform agricultural tasks. So here we have a sort of seeder driller. Now I may have got these slightly wrong, and I don't know all the broadacre agricultural terms. I'm sort of from a coastal area, growing bananas and sugarcane, so if I get them wrong, please excuse me. So next one's a planter, then an auger, and I'll put that down as a tiller or a scarifier or something like that. So they're drawn by, they've got no power supply of their own, they've no motive power of their own, so they're drawn by tractors. So they're agricultural implements. We'll go next one. Now you have an agricultural trailer. So an agricultural trailer means a trailer that is designed to carry a load and used exclusively to perform agricultural tasks. It does not include a semi-trailer. So you can't have a semi-trailer behind a prime mover and say, well, I'm an agricultural trailer. It just doesn't work. So what I've got here is probably a mother bin, big red thing, and they're quite large. So they basically sit in the paddocks. They get filled up by the harvesters. Oh, well, they get filled up from the field bins, and then they use them to load into the trucks for transport of the grain or whatever. The next one's for a silage trailer and carry silage. Next one is a, makes me at home seats. 6 seeing Mount Warning in the background. That's a cane bin trailer working in the Tweed Valley. So, so it carries cane, it carries a load and used exclusively for agricultural purposes. Next one is a spreader trailer. So normally fertiliser spreader, be it manure or some other type of fertiliser, and a field bin. So these are all agricultural trailers and they are always an agricultural vehicle. Next one, Carl. So an agricultural machine. So an agricultural machine means a vehicle with its own automotive power built to perform agricultural tasks. So we can have a self-propelled sprayer up the top there, a harvester, grain harvester, or a combine, or a header, whatever terminology they use. On the left-hand side there is a grape harvester, and then there's what they call a cane haul-out unit, which is a motive unit with a trailer articulated vehicle that's used to haul out cane. We have a cane harvester, so which is interesting that that's actually an Australian invention. They were invented and they're exported worldwide. The one on the bottom left is a quad track rubber tractor. So it's got 4 tracks on it. These are a new addition to the notice, weren't included before. And the one on the right, bottom right, is just your normal rubber tired tractor. This one's sort of a medium sized one. Now, with that tractor on the bottom right, it may not be a class 1 vehicle. It may not be big enough to be a class, depending on its masses and dimensions. So it's an agricultural machine, but it wouldn't be a class 1 if it doesn't exceed the regulation dimensions and masses. All right. So then we go on to agricultural combinations. So an agricultural combination means a combination consisting of at least one agricultural vehicle. Now, these agricultural combinations are covered in the National Notice, Agricultural Notice, and also they run under Class 1 permits as agricultural combinations. So up the top left, we've the top 3. So we've got tractors towing agricultural implements. In the next layer along, next row, in the middle row, we have a tractor towing a field bin by the looks of it, and a tractor, well, in this case, it's a fast track multi-purpose unit towing a cane bin trailer. So these are, again, the agricultural combination. All those top row there, and the second row, both the vehicles in the combination. So you've got 2 agricultural vehicles in that combination. And under the notice, you can actually have more than 2 trailers, more than 1 trailer being towed. So if we have a look at the bottom row, these are a little bit different. So the one on the left, on the bottom, is a prime mover towing an agricultural implement or an agricultural trailer. It's a bit hard to tell, but it's basically a mobile silo or field bin. So in this case, I'm just giving notifications coming through, a bit distracting, but that's okay. In this case, you've got 1 agricultural vehicle in there. So for this case, with the prime mover and the field bin, the field bin is the agricultural vehicle, and Therefore, it's an agricultural combination, and these can run under permits or under the notice if they comply with the notice. The one on the bottom right is interesting. It's a harvester owning a comb trailer. Now, the comb trailer, thing with the comb trailer, it's used to carry a comb. So it carries a load, but it's used for road transport of the comb. So it's not used exclusively for agricultural tasks. So the task that trailer performs is on road transport. It doesn't perform an agricultural task. So, but having said that, because it's being towed by an agricultural machine, which is the harvester, it is an agricultural combinations, and these combinations can operate under the notice and also under permits. Now, later on at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about a different mode of transporting a harvester and a comb around. So, all right, so we've got agricultural combinations. As long as there's one agricultural vehicle in that combination, it's an agricultural combination, and it can operate under the Class 1 agricultural vehicle and combinations notice. Next, Carl. Well, similar to what we did with the last session with the Class 1 oversized overmass load carrying, and also the special purpose vehicles. We'll go through the timeline, give you a bit of a history on how this was all developed. So in 1995, the National Road Transport Commission developed model oversized overmass vehicle regulations, and these included requirements for Class 1 agricultural vehicles. What happened with those is they were then, the jurisdictions adopted those requirements either into regulations like they did in Victoria or into notices as they did in all the other jurisdictions. So Queensland had Form 14, I think, which was a guideline for agricultural vehicles. So after that, in 2006, the National Transport Commission, which morphed out of the National Road Transport Commission, put out another set of model oversized overmass vehicle regulations, and these basically reflected what was in the 1995. And again, the jurisdictions adopted these into notices or into regulations. So in 2014, when the National Heavy Vehicle Law was adopted, the operating conditions from these mobile model regulations were included in Schedule 8 of the mass dimensional loading regulations. So that meant that a lot of the conditions now went into regulations, which means if you issued a notice, those conditions automatically applied to anything operating under that regulations, operating under that notice. So the National Agricultural Vehicle Combinations Notice, it actually calls up those Schedule 8s automatically. So in 2014 also, the state-based notices, or the state notice based on the model regs, were actually transitioned into the heavy vehicle national law. So they became transitional notices, which went for 5 years under the transitional arrangements for the law. So everyone was still operating basically under the same requirements that they had previously. In 2015, sent an Austroads report, which I think Carl is sending out as part of the information, which looked at future challenges of changing agricultural equipment. Now, this looked at the effect of larger farms, bigger equipment, how things were growing, how that would affect the future of access required for agricultural equipment. So it looked at all that, and looking at, because basically none of the major agricultural equipment, harvesters, tractors, everything else is made in Australia. So we've got to look at. So they looked at what was happening overseas, basically Europe and United States, where these things are being built, and saying, well, this is what's coming. And so as part of that, after when the state notices expired as transitional notices, we worked for a couple of years, I think, Carl, to develop a national Class 1 agricultural vehicle and combination mass and dimension exemption notice. So when this was developed, basically it was reflected some of the stuff out of the Austroads report, and it also reflected jurisdictional practices as they've changed from the original OSIM regulations. So they added all these extra things in because that's what the industry needed to continue. So we looked at harmonising, consolidating a lot of that. So, and last year there were some more additions to that 2019 notice. So there's a braking performance requirement in there, which allows you to override as a alternative to using toe mass ratio. And they also included half-track tractors, the notice. So the half-track ones have got usually wheels on the front and a track system on the rear, and they weren't covered in the original 2019 notice. Next one, Carl. Okay. So if we go back to historically to 1995, which is also the 2006, the dimension limits, height 4.6, agricultural machine 12.5 metres, which is actually the regulation length for a single vehicle, agricultural combination 25 metres. Now rear overhang was 4.5 metres or 5.5 metres for augers and conveyors. And they had 4 categories or areas for width. So an uncategorised area was 2.5 metres, which is regulation dimension. Category 1 was 3.5 metres. Category 2 area was 5 metres, and Category 3 area was 6 metres. Now, with these areas, those designated Category 1, 2 and 3 in the notice, but as they are adopted by the jurisdictions, they picked up some different names for them, like there's coastal areas, there's mountainous areas, there's broadacre, flat areas. So the different states all called them different things. So it was very hard, especially if you were travelling, you went across borders to work out what you were actually, supposed to do. So so part of the developing the new notice was harmonising those, and we'll talk a little bit later about how it was harmonised and what it went into. So yeah, so there was all different decisions, and so from the states as to what they call these areas. These area ones had tortuous routes, which was interesting. So next, please. So with mass limits, so an axle fitted with 2 tyres, you've got a maximum of 9 tonnes. Axle fitted with 4 tyres, depending on your ground contact width, it was less than 2.51, was 9 tonne. It was between 2.51 and 3.5, 10.5, and greater than 3.5, 12 tonne. So that'd be your dual tyres fitted to the rear of a large broadacre farming tractor. So when there was no masses for tractor vehicles, because basically they didn't exist at that time, they weren't being used in, in agriculture. And next. So your pilot and escorts, so you basically needed, once you're over 3.7 metres, you needed a pilot. So 3.7 to 4.5, you needed one pilot. If you couldn't see more than 500 metres ahead of you, or of approaching traffic, so that's approaching from front and rear. If you're on a major road, you needed one pilot. But if your clear view of the approaching traffic is less than 5, but you're not on a major road, was nil pilots. So, and then the next section was 4.5 to 6 metres wide, and that's where it stopped. And greater pilots for those things. All right, next page. So what happened in 2019? We produced, after consultation and obtaining consent from nearly every the road manager in jurisdictions and local road managers in Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. There was a national Class 1 agricultural vehicle and combination mass and dimension exemption notice. 2019 at that stage, it's now 2020 because it's been updated, was produced. So that's the latest version, that's on our website. But what we've been doing with a lot of the notices now, the newer notices, we actually develop and issue a operator's guide. So that way, this can be pretty straightforward, sets limits, everything, and the operator's guide contains all the detail and the operational requirements. So the notice says you have to comply with the requirements of the guide, and we can change the guide easily. So it makes it a lot more efficient for developing notices and amending notices and doing things, especially technical minor amendments to notices. But it also gives a guide to the operator and also to yourselves as road managers as to what is allowed and under what conditions. So that's the way we develop them. So that one was developed in 2019 and it was updated in 2020 to pick up half-track tractors and some braking performance requirements. All right, next please, Carl. So as we said before, the National Agricultural Vehicle Notice is actually a consolidation and harmonisation of the state agricultural notices and permit schemes that were based on the original NRTC and NTC model regulations. So what were some of the changes? So some of the changes, the 4 areas were replaced by 5 zones, plus restricted areas where you can't operate agricultural vehicles, well, Class 1 agricultural vehicles that exceed mass or dimension requirements. So there was braking and tow mass ratio requirements in there. The tow mass ratios came from Victoria, and we went through and did some brake testing. Carl did a few trips to South Australia, looking at how we could set up a basically on-road brake test, which would replicate the requirements of the vehicle standards regulations to say, look, if you've got this vehicle and you apply the brakes and it stops within a certain distance, the braking performance is adequate. So there was a fair bit of work going into arrange that. So it's a performance standard now that's within the agricultural notice that was never there before. So the other things that were added were rubber tractors and night travel. So both of these requirements basically came from South Australia. They were allowed under the jurisdictional requirements there. Night travel had to do with, a lot of it had to do with the harvesting of grapes, which is something they do at night because it's cooler. So again, responding to the issues to do with agricultural methodology to try to cover off as much as we can. So there's now been added cane bin trailers and cane harvesters, and they were allowed to, they were operating in Queensland under permit schemes and notices, and the same as the cotton harvesters, they come from Queensland. The long augers have been long-standing under a New South Wales notice, so we picked up bits and pieces from the jurisdictions. So we tried to put together a best practice notice to cover off the practices the jurisdictions were doing, and we came up with this National Agricultural Vehicle Notice, which hopefully means most things can run under notice, and it's only the exceptional ones that you'll need to consent for permits of. So as part of the development of the agricultural notice, we actually went out to all the road managers to get consent. Now, previously with the old model regs, OSM regs based notices, the local authorities didn't have any say in those at all, really. The notice was reintroduced and the other schemes were introduced by the jurisdictions. So we'll go on to have a look at some of the bit of detail in this National Agricultural Vehicle Notice. So we have a look at the dimension limits. And so we go out, we've got more zones. So previously the single vehicle length was 12.5 metres. So that will still exist in zone 1, but in other zones 2, 3, 4, 5. And basically the zones set out that the higher the number of the zone, the more remote and the lower traffic volumes and bigger equipment, broad acre areas and things like that. So that's come in, so up to 15 metres for a single vehicle, and this has also come out of the Austroads report of the actual size of agricultural vehicles growing. An articulated vehicle, something like that, a cane bin combination we looked at before previously with the hauling unit, single axle, permanently connected to a trailer arrangement. So that they go out to 19 metres, they weren't in the original one. If we have a look at the combination length for areas 4 and 5, zones 4 and 5, we're now running at up to 35 metres, where the limit of the other one was 25. Agricultural implement length, originally it was 12 metres, 12.5 metres in the original, and it's now gone out to 25 metres for an agricultural implement. So height, what used to be 4.6, all the states, everyone's agreed to 5 metres high. Width, so zone 1 is 3, and we go out to zone 5, 7.5 metres, where previously it was 6 metres maximum. So you can see this picks up a lot more equipment operating under notices. Single rear vehicle overhang was 4.5, it's gone to 5.5. Auger and rear conveyor rear overhang used to be a maximum of 5.5, but based on the New South Wales allowance for augers and that, it can be up to 10 metres rear overhang. Implement rear overhang, it was 4.5 before, I think, and it goes up now up to 6.5, and the same for harvesters. All right, so they're the general limits. there. There is some jurisdictional specific variances. They may change that based on local requirements or local conditions. So it could be maybe even if you're in zone 3 in a particular jurisdiction or a particular area, you may be reduced down to a lower limit. Okay. Now, anything outside those limits, as mass or dimension limits, will require to operate under a permit and will be going out for consent. All right. Also, as part of the notice, there was an agricultural heavy vehicle zone map developed. Now, this is quite interesting because this map is available through your notice webpage, so there's a link when you go in there. So, and Carl's going to give a bit of a demonstration on it. But the difference with this map, it's actually the NHVR manages the data. So we collected the consents, we put the data in, so this is an actually NHVR-owned map. We want to put it that way. The other network maps you see on our website and in the portal, like the B-double maps and the road train maps and on these other maps, they're actually managed by the individual jurisdictions and we reflect it in the portal. So there is lag between updating of those maps and by the states. So the source of truth for those networks actually sits with the jurisdictions, where with this particular map, this is the source of truth. This is the map. So we're looking at transferring those other maps over to our ownership, but it's how they're managed, especially using different types of data from the different jurisdictions to populate them. So I'll let Carl have a chat to you about the map and what we can do with it, what we can't do with it.
All right, thanks, Kerry. I'll just quickly show you sort of how the map functions. So you can access the map from the NHVR website. I'll send out these links as part of the resources. So you can access it through the notice page, the National Ag Notice page. I think it's the 4th link here.
That's where the operator guide is as well.
Yep. And bear with me. So the map will come up, just a bit of some terms, a bit of information here. Usually you just press start. And this is the map. So the zones that Kerry mentioned before are all shown on the map with each state and territory, and they are color-coded. So, for example, you're able to zoom in and see if there's any conditions in the particular area. So, for example, let's just go to Queensland here. There is a legend here, but the colors are a bit, they're quite close. So if you're unsure of what zone a particular area is in, you can always press this little pop-up box here and choose the 3rd tab, and it'll show you sort of what zone is what. Bear with me 1 second. So yeah, it'll be zone 4 approved, coastal zone, and that's where you can use this legend here to check what dimensions apply. Let's just go into one, for example. Let's just say Western Downs. There are some red dots in their area because they, at the time when consent was provided, they gave a blanket approval, and they also put in some conditions relating to the urban areas. What the map also allows you to do is that there are layers, so you can choose conditions. We'll put some on here. And what this will obviously show is your major roads. I think the legend is here. Yeah, critical areas, critical roads, and major roads, which also can be viewed. As Kerry was mentioning before, this map is reflected off when we went out to consultation 2018 or 19. So there will be some areas on here that are shown as not approved. For example, these councils in South Australia. That's probably because consent has not been provided to the NHVR yet. I am aware of some delays with our mapping guys. I think it's one of the councils here they have approved, but we just haven't had the maps updated. And I'm actively following up on that. Kerry, was there anything you wanted to add?
Oh no, just you can check on that, and yeah, so you can see the idea is, you know, an operator can look onto these maps and can actually, but what you might be worthwhile is just checking on the map to make sure that it's right for you. So,
Yep.
and if you're one of the ones that have got question marks on it, a response would be nice. Thanks.
I think, and yeah, just to sort of go back a few steps, when you're operating under the National Agriculture Notice, what we showed before, this is the map for that notice. Do you want to go back to the presentation, Kerry?
Yeah, we can go back.
Yeah. Just there are only a few slides left, so if you do have any questions, please send them in. I think we do have a few already. Okay.
Okay then. So again, with the new notice or the national notice, there was an upgrade on mass limits. So originally it was a axle fitter with 2 tyres. It used to be 9. It's now gone up to 10. And I don't think that's my children.
Sorry, bear with me.
Right. Okay. So you can now get 20 tonne on a tandem axle group, say on a trailer fitted with single tyres on each axle, or 27 on a triaxle group to a trailer. Axle fitted with 2 tyres and with wider tyres, so over 16-inch tyres, 406, so your flotation tyres, 12 tonne on a single axle, 24 tonne on a tandem axle group. And then if you axle fitted with 4 tyres, they're actually very similar to what was in the original one. So the upgrades have been on single tyres. And rubber tracked mass limits, which didn't exist in the original model regulations. So dual track tractor can have 24 tonne total, quad track 24 tonne, and half track tractor 24 tonne total, and then you refer to table 6, which tells you how much you can have on your single on your rubber tyres, but your maximum of 24 tonne. So they're already restricted to a maximum of 24 tonne. Okay. Next, please, Carl. So night travel. Now this is brand new for the notice. So again, there's some jurisdictional differences, but they're in the operator's guide. So it talks about zones 1 to 5, agricultural heavy vehicle restricted road, which will be what will be shown. So 2.5 wide, 25 long, no pilots. As you get wider, and depending which area you're in Tasmania, you've got, depending on your width, is how many pilots you need and your length. And again, that goes down. So these are new conditions that weren't included in the original notices that the jurisdictions were working on. So this is something new. So next. Pilots and escorts. So again, these are general requirements and some jurisdictional specific variances occur. So it talks about a width greater than 3.7, and it's very similar to what was allowed before, and width greater than 4.5. So you'll have to have over 3. Yeah, so if it's over 3.7, you have 1 pilot, basically, depending on your conditions. Or 0 pilots depending, and again it's the same for the greater than 4.5. So again, harmonisation and coordination of requirements. So next one. Now, as we talked about earlier, the use of agricultural equipment has changed. So basically, there's also a need not only to move agricultural equipment around between holdings or across roads or within between paddocks. There's other occasions where agricultural equipment needs to be moved. So some of these would be delivery of new equipment. If a manufacturer is building or importing agricultural equipment, it needs to go out to the farm or to where it needs to be used. There's a relocation of agricultural equipment. So I've sold it, I need it, or I want to move it to a different holding. How can I do that? I don't really want to drive it down the road because it's not economically viable, it's not efficient, it's not safe. And then we have the contract harvesters as well, which means we've got agricultural equipment, particularly harvesters, moving long distances on major roads. So this is something that's come up since the development of the original OSIM regulations and the model laws. So what's following is some of the methods and methodology for addressing some of these issues. So we'll go first. Next slide, please. So what you can do, if I've got agricultural equipment, be it new or being relocated, or I can use it as a Class 1 load carrying vehicle, on a Class 1 load carrying vehicle, either under the Class 1 load carrying notices, either dimension or mass exemption notice, or under permit. Now, if you have a look at that picture, you'll say, well, that's not indivisible loading. Under the notice, it actually allows in Schedule 8 of the mass dimensional loading regs for you to carry multiple indivisible items based on compliance with a couple of conditions. And basically those conditions, and that also includes removed parts. So basically is that an additional dimension is not exceeded. And I'll explain that on that picture. So if you have a look at first, looks like a infield silo or infield bin with an auger attached. First one there, it's a certain height, a certain width. So it looks like it could be over width, so over 2.5, and it's looks like it's, it may be over height, it may be over. So what the regulation says, I can carry another indivisible item as long as it doesn't cause a dimension that wasn't exceeded. As long as it doesn't exceed a dimension that wasn't exceeded previously. So in this case, it's the same width, the second unit, therefore it's not increasing width, so that's okay. It's because it's loaded on the lower part of the deck, it's not making the height of the vehicle any higher. So good, that's good. With overall length, as long as the measurement from the front of the trailer, from the front of the prime mover to the rearmost part of that load, which is the second unit, is no more than 19 metres, that meets the requirements. So it looks like that's probably good. And also I can carry additional goods as well. So and remove parts. So those tyres that are sitting on there that have been removed, and they would have been removed for two reasons. One, to reduce the width of the vehicle, of the load, and two, to reduce the height of the load. So it actually, by carrying the tyres like that, adds to the safety of that vehicle. And so, and they don't increase the width or height or length of that vehicle, of that loading. So that can operate under the notice, under the Class 1 load carrying notice, as long as it's within the dimension mass required. The other thing is, when you're doing multiple loading like this, you're not to allow to exceed general mass limits. So you can't be over mass. You can't run at CML and you can't run at HML. So for this particular combination, steer axle mass 6.5 tonne as for a complying steer axle. General mass limits on the tandem axle group is 16.5 tonne, and the triaxle group at the rear would get 20 tonnes general mass limits. So as long as within those limits, I can do this as an indivisible load under the Class 1 load carrying notice. So, and that's how you can do it. A lot of agricultural equipment, such as these things, aren't that heavy. So this is how you would transport them as a Class 1 load carrying vehicle. So we go to the next one. So what also happens is, if you've got multiple trailers, so basically B-doubles and road trains, you're not a Class 1 indivisible load because you're basically using two different trailers for it. So these things are wide, so they're over 2.5 metres wide. So they're large indivisible items, but because you're carrying two of them, and you're carrying on a B-double in this case, or a road train, you actually need a class. It's actually a Class 3 application. So one of the reasons why they restrict, in this case, wide loads on these sort of combinations is on a normal semi or a low loader or something like that, when you're going down the road, basically the trailer tracks behind the towing vehicle. But once you start adding extra trailers, especially in road trains and things like that, the rear trailer or the trailers behind the first trailer tend to move about, which means you take up more lane width and everything else like that. When you're travelling down the road, you tend to swing out a bit on corners at high speed. So there's some issues with that. So generally, you're not allowed to carry wide loads on B-doubles and road trains, except under permit, or in Queensland, there's actually a Class 3 notice which talks about carrying wide, or over indivisible items, which these two field bins, mother bins would be, up to 3.2 metres wide and 4.6 metres high on respective routes. So that's a notice in there. So again, by carrying this on a B-double, you're probably getting some safety and productivity improvements, but it all depends on how wide they're going and everything. So we do assessments for some of the road managers, particular jurisdictions, as to the effect of this. So with that particular one, even though it's B-double, because it's wide, it may take up the road space and the swept path requirements of a Type 1 road train. So we would say, well, yeah,
All right, I think we may have lost Kerry there. Bear with me 1 second. So just to sort of jump onto what Kerry was saying, the example we have here doesn't really fit into your Class 1 vehicle category. It's Class 3, and I think it's Queensland who has a notice that allows for this travel on certain routes with certain requirements. I'll be able to circulate that as well, resources. I'll jump onto the next slide. I don't think this is the last slide. This is another sort of vehicle that is quite common in some jurisdictions. It is Class 3 due to exceeding dimension. I'm just going to go through the dot points here. So the comb trailer is not an agricultural trailer because the trailer itself doesn't perform the agricultural task. It's just to transport the header of the harvester or the detached comb. So currently in New South Wales and Victoria, I do believe there is a permit scheme and there are some pre-approvals that will allow this vehicle to run. In the other states, I think that we are working to get a similar scheme across the board. What I can do, I think Kerry had a few dot points, a few other things they wanted to mention for this particular vehicle. What I'll do, I'll include them in the resources for you all again. So that sort of brings us to the last slide of the presentation. Thanks for attending again. There are a few questions I'll try and answer. And if some of them are more suited to Kerry, I'll get in touch with you guys directly. The next session is in 2 weeks from now. It'll be on vehicle and route assessment. I will send out the invitations for that session probably later this week, along with everything we mentioned today. I'll go through some of the questions. So we have a mapping question here. Yeah, I've provided consent, but the map still says we're not approved. I know there are a few across some of the states. I'll follow up with our GIS guys to see if they can edit that as soon as possible. Another one here. What permit approvals are required for an under mass and dimension tractor? The example we showed, I think, in the first few slides, let me quickly go ahead a bit. Yeah, so the one in the bottom right hand corner, if they don't fit in a Class 1, they would generally, and they're within the prescribed mass and dimension limits, like the 2.5, the 19, and under the 6 ton on the steer axle here, and then the mass limit for the drive axle, they would probably be general access vehicles. So they should be free to operate on the road, subject to the road rule conditions and signposted limits. Thanks, David, for your feedback on the presentation. We'll probably try and increase the font size for the future sessions. Look, at the moment, there are 2 other questions here, but I might get in touch with you directly. There are some about Pilots and Escorts. I do have Kerry trying to call me and trying to log in again, but it's not working. Look, I think I might end it here. And again, if there's anything, please contact us. And I will add a bit more content to that last slide, because I know Kerry did have a few things he wanted to say about this one. All right, thanks again, and sorry about this disconnection we had at the end. Thank you all.